So in chapter 8, we talked about correlations at one time, generally, not always, but we talked about correlations between two variables. Um, and those were interesting, but they had difficulties with prediction and difficulties with being able to draw any conclusions about causality. In chapter 9, we're talking about a variety of steps that move us a little bit closer to causal conclusions. We're going to start here with longitudinal designs. So let's think about these three causal criteria: covariance, temporal precedence, internal validity. In multivariate designs, our we are talking about two measured variables. And our longitudinal designs help us to address temporal precedence. So in chapter 8, we were looking at covariance. Here we're able to draw some conclusions about temporal precedence, although we still have difficulties with internal validity. With multiple regression analyses, we're a little bit closer on internal validity if we then asked about all the right variables. So with a cross-sectional design, we're looking at people at one point in time, and then maybe comparing them to another group of people at a different point in time, and a third group of people at another. So 5, 15, and 25 years. Autocorrelations are what we see with longitudinal designs, where we're seeing the same group of people at 3 different times. Now, with cross-lag correlations, we are comparing one variable with at one point in time with another variable at another point in time. Does this predict this? And that's part of what Michel did with the marshmallow test. What he did is he gave children a marshmallow and said, if you wait for this amount of time, I'll give you a second marshmallow. And he left the room. And that's a really hard thing for, 4 or 5-year-old to do. Those children who were able to wait had higher achievement scores at age 15, with a correlation of about 0.3. That's a fairly good correlation, particularly as we're talking about over a period of 10 years. That's pretty amazing. One of the difficulties, so our criterion variable is achievement at age 15. Our predictor variable is, can they delay for the second marshmallow? So our question would be, does marshmallow waiting cause better achievement? We know that there's covariance, we know that there's temporal precedence, but is there internal validity? And one of the difficulties, one of the things that other researchers have brought up is this issue of socioeconomic status. That is, wealthy children are encouraged to wait, while lower class children, it is, you eat what's available right then. So let's look at another study and look at correlation, those longitudinal correlations and cross-lags. So here's our cross-sectional correlations. between TV violence at third grade and aggression at third grade, TV violence at 13th grade and aggression at 13th grade. We can also do longitudinal correlations. So not really a prediction at third grade or with TV violence, but there is a correlation in terms of aggression. And in terms of our cross legs, aggression at third grade doesn't predict TV violence at 13th grade, but TV violence at third grade does predict aggression at 13th grade. So if we're thinking about causality, we know that there is covariance between TV violence and aggression at third grade. We know that there's temporal precedence for aggression because TV violence predicts aggression. Now, aggression did not predict TV violence in 13th grade, so there's no temporal precedence for TV violence. What about internal validity? Could some other variable, perhaps peer group, perhaps the kind of schools that a child goes to, parenting strategies, could those predict what happens here? And this study does not exclude some of those other variables. Now, let's think about how to design a cross-leg panel study. We know that there's a relationship between a baby's fussiness and how mom responds. In general, more responsive mothers have less fussy babies. But the question is, which came first, chicken or the egg, right? And so what I want you to do is go through these 3 questions and turn off your video after them and come back and we'll talk about them. So sketch the results of a longitudinal correlation study to test this question. 2 key variables 3 times. So think about what the 2 variables are and maybe even think about how you might operationalize those. What kind of results would you get if maternal responsiveness leads to decreased internal fussiness? So turn your camera off now and back on when you're ready. Here is the figure from Hubbard and Van Eichendorn's article, and you can see the cross-sectional correlations, the longitudinal correlations, and the cross legs. And the correlations between time 1 and time 2 are actually pretty decent. So we have a correlation of 0.55 and 0.59 and 0.64, 0.81. Those are all pretty good. Let's look at the cross legs, because those are really the interesting ones here, I think. Do crying babies have less responsive mothers? So what this says is that babies that cry tend to have more unresponsive mothers at time 2. To some degree at time 3. If we're looking, however, at unresponsive mothers, we're seeing a good correlation here. 0.53 about the same. And about the same correlation between unresponsive mothers and crying. But if we're looking at unresponsive parents or mothers at this point, time 2, we're seeing an extremely high correlation with crying at time 3. So suggesting that maternal unresponsiveness leads to more infant crying. So one of your questions should be, why not just do an experiment? And part of the difficulty is that we can't randomly assign some variables. For example, maternal responsiveness, preferences for marshmallows, disease, gender. And it may actually be unethical to assign participants to some groups. You know, for example, if we think that watching violent TV might make a child more aggressive later, I'm not sure that I would want my child to be involved in that study, right? And we will stop here, and I will see you for the next video, which is on multiple regression. And take care. Bye-bye.